Okay, folks, for all of you guys listening this afternoon, we're going to start here in the next 1 minute with PI Education's monthly webinar. Hang with us. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, to the PI Education monthly webinar. Disclaimers: we are not attorneys. We are not offering legal advice. When you have legal questions, hire an attorney. This is PI Education's monthly webinar for February 2018. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Today, ethics, defense investigations, and books. PI Education offers these monthly webinars every month on the fourth Thursday of the month. They're free, they're informative, and they're a way for you to get to know us and us to get to know you. You can ask questions if you like. There's a chat feature underneath or to the right of your video screen on YouTube. Feel free to ask questions. Stephanie is moderating this, and she will send those directly to me if you have any questions. We're glad you're here. I'm joined today by Phillip Becnel. He's an investigator out of DC. Phillip is managing partner of Dinolt, Becnel, and Wells Investigative Group. Did I say all those names correctly, Phillip?
You got it.
Great. Phillip is a superb investigator. I've seen him speak, and he's one of the most engaging presenters in this business. Phillip is also an author. He's written several books, including Principles of Investigative Documentation and Introduction to Conducting Private Investigations. You may have read his work in Time Magazine, Westlaw Journal, and The Corporate Counselor, but I'm pretty sure he's most proud of his articles for Pursuit Magazine.
Of course.
Phillip has testified as an expert. He's a pundit for national media outlets, and he teaches. All in all, Phillip Becnel is quite simply an interesting dude. Phillip and I met several years ago, and I've always wanted to find a way to work with him in some projects. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to our guest for the February PI Education webinar, Mr. Phillip Becnel. Phillip, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, it's hard to top that introduction. As you said, I'm the managing partner of Dinolt, Becnel, and Wells Investigative Group here in our nation's capital. It's a mid-sized investigative group. We're 9 people. 5 investigators, some management staff, and the admin folks. We specialize in litigation support for attorneys and law firms in DC and around the country. A lot of employment litigation, criminal defense, class actions, personal injury, kind of the gambit of litigation cases. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, since 1999. And as you said, I've written a couple books that I'm pretty proud of, and I'm also proud of my articles that I've written for various places, including Pursuit Magazine, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you for the plug there. We appreciate it. We are going to, hang on one second. I had a note here, but I couldn't see you on the screen. So I should be on the screen right now. Today, we're going to be talking about ethics, defense investigations, and the last thing we're going to do today, and I think you all should stick around for, is we're going to talk about Phillip Becnel's latest book, which is pretty entertaining stuff. Phillip, when people say ethics, what do you think?
Boy, you have to start off with the most complicated question, don't you? the broadest question. When I think of ethics, and I know this is not a textbook definition, I think of doing the right thing given the circumstances that you're presented with. And that right thing might differ depending on the right decision is something that I think is something that that most people would agree on.
I think you're right about that. I had we had some people in here in the studio here at PI Education a couple of weeks ago working on an ethics course, and one of them said the simple definition of ethics is doing the right thing when no one is looking.
That's what I should have said. But yeah, I agree with that 100%.
So we have anytime you start talking about ethics, people's eyes tend to glaze over. It's just one of those topics that people aren't terribly excited about.
Mhm.
But I think it's important that we talk about ethics in investigations for a number of reasons. If an investigator is out there doing work in an unethical fashion, they don't only put themselves at risk, they put their clients at risk, they put their attorneys' clients at risk. Um, they end up with evidence that is not going to be admissible or usable. There are a lot of problems with unethical behavior, and I think we kind of discussed this beforehand. There are some steps you can take to kind of ensure that you have your moral compass calibrated, so to speak. Does that sound right?
Sounds 100% right.
Okay.
I mean, our business is fraught with ethical perils. We do investigations for a fee to people who, for private interests, and those private interests are all over the map. And so there's almost a built-in ethical dilemma from the minute that you start doing an investigation. And if you're not thinking about that beforehand, you're bound to step into a trap and get yourself and other people in trouble and potentially hurt people too.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's one of the things that Kevin McNish is the fellow that put together our ethics course for us. Kevin is an ethicist by trade, which sounds like a totally fascinating job. He was teaching when we worked with him on the ethics course. He was at the University of Leeds. He has since moved on to another university. But okay, they're saying that Phil is audio only, and I'm not seeing that issue here. I'm seeing Phil on my screen when he talks. So Stephanie, if you have any problems with that, maybe check with Doug. Well, let's get into kind of some ways we can shore up our idea of what ethical is. And the first one is just cause. There needs to be a good reason to do the investigation. When you get a call from a client on an investigative topic, does that come into play for you? Do you factor that into whether or not you're going to take the case?
No, absolutely. I can't count how many times people have called and expressed a certain vagueness about why it is that they want to do an investigation. They want X information. They want you to do whatever, but they can't articulate why it is that they want the information, either because they can't, because they're trying to not give you that information, or it's because they don't know exactly why. They can't articulate it because they haven't thought about it enough themselves. And I think that's really one of our jobs is to help people sort that out and to figure out why it is they want the information. Is there a permissible purpose for you to get that information? It's built into our database. Look, you can't do a database search without knowing why you're doing the search. And surveillance and background checks, those aren't types of investigations. Those are means to get information and within the rubric of different types of investigation. And so they're a means to an end and not the end in itself. So yeah, you definitely have to have an understanding of why it is people want the information from the get-go, or you shouldn't be working on the case.
Yeah, fair enough. In the work that I do mostly, and I think you were saying earlier that a good portion of the work that you do is criminal defense work, and in those cases, there is usually not much of a question as to whether or not there is a good reason to be doing the investigation. But for I do some due diligence work, and I do some work for private companies and private attorneys, and sometimes you have to ask those questions. What is this? Why are we doing this? Do we have the right to do this?
Right. Yeah, I agree that when you're doing a defense case or when there's litigation, it's obvious the intent is generally implicit within the case that you're involved in. So that should be clear. But sometimes you get clients within, if you're working for an attorney and the defendant, say in a criminal case, takes an active role in trying to direct what the I just saw my video go off. What the investigation, you were testing it. Then that's a situation where you got to be careful, because sometimes the defendant will either for nefarious reasons or because they just don't know what's important in their own case, will try to direct you to do things that aren't necessary for their case. And
Right. And I've had a number of one of the interesting things I find about criminal cases is when you're dealing with the defendant, they will sometimes ask you to look into things that have nothing to do with their defense because they're curious or because they're upset or anything like that. So as investigators, I think it's pretty important that we think about those things. You mentioned earlier intention, and that's the next step in this little rubric of how to decide whether or not to take a case. The reason you're doing the investigation should be the same as the just cause. There shouldn't be any ulterior motive on the part of the private investigator or the person that you're working for, your client. And we don't always know that, but we have to do our due diligence to make sure that the intended use of the investigative material is clear and forthright.
Right. And just to be clear, are you talking about the investigator's intention to do the investigation or the intention of the use of the information? I guess, like you just said.
I think both. And when we're talking about ethics and this kind of global idea of ethics, we've got to think about, what is our intention in doing this work. I know you just had an article published in Pursuit Magazine about doing investigations in this kind of divided political world. And we all have opinions about politics. We all have strong opinions about politics. And at this day and age in the United States of America, those opinions are becoming more strong and more divergent, it seems. So when I get a call for a case, I have to kind of check my level of schadenfreude that I might feel if I find the information I'm looking for, and make sure that I'm not going into it with the wrong intention, that I'm not approaching it with a bad intention.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the issue of intentions in general is I think it's interesting because on one level, our intentions are to bill hours and to make an income. I mean, we're all trying to make a living off of doing investigations. And so it's all, not all, but a big part of it is about the business aspect of it. Working cases, billing hours, being able to pay our bills. But we're not, or we shouldn't be one-dimensional. I mean, we're much more than just our occupations. We're also human beings who have families and have values and have a lot of other baggage that we carry with us. And so all of those things make up different intentions within every time we accept a case. And part of that intention might be a genuine desire to help the defendant achieve the best outcome given his circumstances in that case. And that should be part of your intentions just as much as billing the case should be part of your intentions. And it should also be part of your intentions to not want to screw anybody over in the process and to not hurt society or hurt people as a part of your investigations too. So all of those things should be, I guess your intention should be multifaceted, and you should be aware of all those different things, that one of them isn't outweighing the other when you make a decision to take a case, and when you make decisions within your investigations to do whatever it is you're doing. So anyway, I think that's a really interesting topic. We could probably talk about that for an hour and a half.
I have no doubt that we could. And as we're talking about it, I'm thinking about a couple of situations where, I've had someone ask me to work on an investigation, and I have to kind of stop and think. I got a call from a client, a governmental client, last week, and the process they use with me is I'm on a contract with them, so they send me an email that says, "Please verify you got this email. We have another case for you to look at." I verified that I got the email, opened it up, and lo and behold, the case is a case against a guy that I know very well. And my initial thought was, I can take this job on because I'm going to be an independent third party. But the more I thought about it, and I was sitting with a lawyer friend of mine, and I said, I know this guy and we're not really good friends, but I'm not entirely sure I can be impartial in this. And I called the person that contacted me about it, and we kind of talked through it and decided the best thing to do would be to hand it off to someone else, because I might approach that project with an attitude of helping a buddy out. And that's not the way we're supposed to do this work.
Yeah. Those are tough questions. Every time you have a case like that you need to
Yeah, it's crazy. And again, I think we could devote a whole hour to intention in a
Sure.
number of ways. The next step on the list is authority. Do you have the authority to pursue this investigation? Does the PI have the authority? Are they licensed? Is there a licensure available in their state? Does the client have the authority to request the investigation or not? And these are important things to consider. You know, we are private investigators. We investigate on behalf of other people. So we work for attorneys, we work for private individuals, we work for companies, we work for government agencies. But at the end of the day, if the person asking us to look into something doesn't have the authority, we could get into trouble pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That should be one of the first questions you ask, is if somebody's calling you to do it. Well, I mean, licensing is complicated in the United States. It varies by state. Some states allow you to come into their states and do investigations, even if you're not licensed there, as long as you're licensed somewhere else. Some states don't. There's reciprocity agreements. There's some states that don't have licensing at all. We've had some pretty complicated cases big cases where there was a lot of the potential for a lot of revenue for us when the case is out of state. And sometimes we're in a state where we're not licensed and where we don't have reciprocity. And we've had to turn those cases away because you might get away with it legally, but it's not ethical. Perhaps one case I'm thinking about in particular, you should research it. We did one case that was out of state at a college campus because the incident happened at a college campus. It was a wrongful death case. I flew there and interviewed students. But before I did that, I looked at their laws, and the laws of this particular state allowed you to come in and do investigations in that state, provided the litigation that was the basis of the investigation was filed in a different state. Now, it just so happened that the litigation of the case, because there was a co-defendant, was filed in a totally separate state from where the university was located, and we had reciprocity in that state. So it happened to work out, but we had to do a ton of research into that issue to figure out whether we could take the case or not. Of course, it was like an overnight, multi-day investigation involving a bunch of witnesses, and it was pretty lucrative. So we wanted to take the case if we could, but had we not found that, I don't want to call it a loophole because it wasn't a loophole, it was the law, but had we not found out that there was a way to do it, we probably would have had to turn it down.
Yeah, and that's I run a small agency, and when we get a chance to get a big job like that, it can be kind of crushing to realize, oh, I can't do that thing. Typically what I do is, I feel like you're probably similar in the way you approach this work. We have a list of investigators that we know around the country, and I'm happy to hand a case off to someone in a state where I'm not licensed to work, and refer them to my client. Say, hey, I can't do that work, but I've got a friend over here that can do that work. And again, we work in a business where we're paid to go out and talk to people and do the investigation, and it can be really hard to pass up the chance to make some money, but sometimes you just got to walk away from it.
Absolutely. And the attorney that you have to turn down will respect you for that, and they'll hopefully hire you again when the next case comes around that's within your jurisdiction. And the investigator who you refer the case to will appreciate it too. And they'll look at you as an ethical person who's doing the right thing, and you'll get rewarded for it ultimately, I hope.
And the fun thing about that is everybody wins in that certain situation, but it comes back around. I mean, it works out kind of like karma. You do a good thing for a friend investigator in Oregon, they're going to help you out later on. They're going to refer something to you, or they'll get a call from a friend in New York who says, I'm looking for somebody in Tennessee, and they'll call me. It kind of works that way. Look, it's not a zero-sum game. We're out here doing the work. We're trying to make a living and get good results for our clients, but I don't have to have all of it. I'm not going to get all of it. So it's no skin off my back to refer work to other investigators, because I'm always going to have the next thing coming down the pike.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about chances of success and ethics in taking on an investigation. There is this idea that if you as an investigator know there's no chance in hell you're going to find the thing, should you take the job?
No. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but we get calls all the time from people who are quite obviously mentally ill, who have delusions that they're being followed, that sometimes they're bizarre things in their brains. Sometimes it's just, somebody's leaving something on their door and they want to catch the person, and it's like, yeah, when you know that in taking a case that there is no chance, when it's quite frankly obvious that the person is deranged or delusional, or there's just no way to get the information that person seeks, you should not be taking the case. Now, having said that, we have taken cases for attorneys, and also one time a referral from a psychologist who recommended that somebody who had mental illness needed to be proved wrong because it was important to their treatment in one way or shape or form. But in that case, at least we had an expert or somebody between us who was able to say this is for the greater good in this person's situation, and we did it. One case in particular I can recall was an elderly couple in DC who they were convinced that somebody was breaking into their house. Or no, it wasn't a person. It wasn't a stranger. It was a home health person who they were convinced was coming back after hours and stealing stuff. And they had this list of things that they were missing. And this was a really wealthy couple, and it was like rare paintings and just a bunch of stuff that kind of like, it was a pretty weird case. But anyway, wouldn't have normally taken that case because it seemed really strange to me. But the attorney wanted us to take it, so we took it. We worked it for a few hours, and it quickly turned into a situation where we were like, hey, this couple is, there's no way that what they're describing happened because the doors are locked in such a way, there was no way that it could physically happen. And once we came to that conclusion, we stopped the case. And so rather than billing them, if you wanted to be unethical about it, you could have just kept the clock running and billed them $20,000 to find a bunch of stuff that actually wasn't missing. Or you pull the plug and you do the right thing and you say, look, they need some help or something else that I can't provide them.
Right. And I think the question of whether or not it's possible to find the information, I'm sure you've gotten this call on a number of occasions. I know several investigators I've worked with across the country get this call. I want you to track this cell phone.
Yeah.
And I've talked to investigators who say, oh yeah, I can do that. And they take the money and they come back and say, well, we didn't have any luck. And that's clearly just wrong. It's bad business. It probably falls in the realm of illegal if you wanted to dig into it.
Yeah, I think that's arguably fraud. If you're saying that you're going to do something that you can't do, and you can't do it, and then you're billing them for that service. I mean, it does go back to the issue of intent, though. I mean, a lot of times people call and they have an issue that they need resolved, and that's the reason for calling an investigator. And people have no idea what investigators have, what sort of information they have access to, and what they're capable of doing. And so they might call and say, well, we want you to do X, and you know that you can't do X. But if you talk to them and you go, well, why do you want us to do X? Why are you trying to, what is it you're trying to do? Well, I'm in this litigation with this person, and I think that they're, coming on my property, or I don't know, whatever the issue is. But when you start talking about that issue, you go, oh, actually, there's another way to resolve that issue without resorting to tracking their phone. And then everybody's happy because you've solved the problem, you've done it ethically, and you're not over-promising them that you're going to do stuff that you can't actually do.
Yeah. And I think that's another key in the business is, I like to call it client management, expectation management. I try to undersell and over deliver as much as possible. I do not like it when I tell someone, oh, I can get X, Y, and Z, and then it's just not possible to get it. And the more, I've been in this business for about 10 years now. I've got a decent amount of experience. But the more you do it, the more you figure those things out. And I know we've got some new folks in the crowd today. So what I'm saying is, it's good that you're here listening about ethics. It's good that you're thinking about these things. But you learn what works and what doesn't work, and what is right and what is not right as you go along. We've got a question from the gallery. Privacy concerns are huge these days. What are some safeguards Phillip uses to keep things confidential for his clients?
In the sense of, well, we have contracts with our clients that say that we won't divulge information. We have internet, security. Their documents are secure and password protected, and we don't. The basic stuff that any company would do to safeguard information in terms of digital security, and a practice of, I guess ethically not talking about people's cases and not divulging information that I think that answers the question, but there's
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah. A lot of it is just the common practices of investigators that it's a state law in Virginia. You can't talk about people's cases. There's laws in other states that are similar. Most of the work we do is through attorneys. So there's the privilege aspect and attorney-client privilege aspect of it too, where we would be ethically violating people's privacy by divulging information related to their cases. And when we safeguard the information we have by keeping it away from people who shouldn't have it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what the questioner was getting at. They just said, perfect, thanks.
Okay.
Is the idea of, we have access to crazy stories, and we're asked to tell crazy stories all the time because the first thing someone says when they find out that you're a private investigator, they're like, oh my gosh, you've got to have the best stories. We can tell stories about our work. It's okay. But we have to do it in such vague and undefinable ways that no one, can figure out what we're talking about, basically.
Right.
There are certain anecdotes that I can tell that, I can get the point across. I can get the idea of what happened across, and there's no way anyone can figure out what happened. I'm not talking about a specific case.
Yeah.
So let's move on to necessity. Is the investigation necessary? Are there other means of finding the information available which are less harmful? And I think that's what you were just talking about in the last one is, someone calling saying, hey, can you track the cell phone? And you say, why are you looking for it? And then you guide them to another source of information. I think that's kind of what they're getting at here.
Yeah.
And the idea of harmful here, I think, falls into the category of if you're conducting surveillance on a subject, you are in a way, I think some people will construe harming them by invading their privacy to some degree. Now, I know there are so many arguments about if they're in the public and if they're visible and if they're this, it's not invasion of privacy. I get that. But realistically, I don't want people watching me walk down the street. That's just kind of creepy.
Sure. Yeah, that's you're 100% right. And I mean, so a big part of the work that we do at my firm, a lot of it's employment litigation related. Investigations are often used as tools for retaliating against employees, who complained about different things. I mean, it can be a tactic for harassment and invading people's privacy if it's misused. So you have a lot of responsibility as an investigator to not become a tool for people who are would use you towards those ends. And I think it goes back to the issue of when you first take a case, understanding that there's a legitimate, permissible reason for the investigation, that it's not a phishing expedition or just being used to harass somebody or to harm somebody. I mean, divorce cases are a good example of this because there's so much emotion involved in divorces and custody cases, and people can often be irrational. Speaking of somebody who's been divorced twice, I understand why that is. It's a really emotional. It's like the worst time in your life, and you want, you don't know what you want really, and so you often reach out. We get these calls from people who, part of it might be the custody or the divorce case, and there could be some legitimate reason to do investigations in those cases, and there are, but oftentimes there's also this vindictiveness or revenge aspect to it, or I just want to know aspect. And if somebody can't articulate why they want to know something, then they probably isn't a permissible purpose for them to know that information, or to at least hire an investigator to find it out. And so, in divorce cases in particular, I think you got to be extra careful with that. I mean, case in point is people who call and they say, I want to find out if my husband or my wife is cheating on me. I found all these text messages where he admits to cheating on me. And you're like, well, wait a second, you have the evidence. There's an admission right there. I mean, why don't you hire a lawyer and find out if that's admissible? And then it may or may not be hearsay, but the admission against self-interest might not be. You might be able to save yourself $5,000, $6,000, $20,000, without having to harass the person.
The thing that I find interesting about those cases is, and the phrase that I get more often than not is, I just want this for my own peace of mind. And I'm like, no, this is not going to bring you peace of mind. It's going to bring you information. It's going to verify what you're doing. It's going to give you some justification, but you've already got the answer.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting one, and this is again from Kevin Nish's course on ethics. He talks about declaration. Has the fact of the investigation been declared to an authority? If not, what is to distinguish it in the eyes of an onlooker from a personal investigation or even stalking? I know that I generally don't declare my investigation to an authority. I don't let them know that I'm doing the investigation. Now, on the criminal defense side, um, typically the court knows that I've been hired. The court may be paying for my services, so I guess that's a declaration of sorts. But for divorce cases, I mean, would you declare to an authority that you're doing this work, or would you rely on the attorney to, they've hired me in this case and there's an actual legal matter pending, that kind of thing?
First off, we don't do very many divorce cases. So, but I guess there have been instances in the past where if we're doing surveillance in a neighborhood, I guess it might be a good idea to tell somebody that you're there. But the way I interpreted this, actually, I thought of an example in a criminal defense case. It's happened to us a few times where usually in spousal cases, but so husbands being investigated for killing their spouse but hasn't been charged yet, is on the loose, hires an attorney, a defense attorney, and wants you to do an investigation ostensibly to find out who the real killer was, right? And to me, that's a pretty blurry line between, that's really a defense investigation, but you're trying to find out who the real killer is, and maybe the person's innocent, you have no idea. But I think that's where you could get into issues with declaration, where are you really doing an investigation concurrent with the police investigation, or are you just a criminal defense investigator? And this case that's really jumping to mind is one where we were contacted by a lawyer representing a guy who was out of the country and wanted us to do an investigation of his wife's death. She died at a hotel downtown under suspicious circumstances, and he left the country. And it wanted to hire us to do an investigation, again, ostensibly because the police weren't doing their job or weren't doing it fast enough. But it really became clear pretty early in the conversation that what was really going on was they wanted to find out if the husband was a suspect in the case and why he left, and so they were trying to give him information. Now, I don't make a judgment about ethically whether you could do that case, but I think you should be honest about what the purpose of the investigation is, and if the person who's trying to hire you is shading over that issue or not being clear about it, I think that there could be some trouble. You need to kind of sometimes set people straight. Well, hey, wait a second here. We're not doing an investigate. We're not doing a police investigate. We're not investigating the homicide here to catch the real killer. We're really trying to gather facts that are going to help you in your situation, whether they charge or not or whatever.
Yeah, that's one of those things that gets to, you're doing someone else's job at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to do a defense investigation before somebody's charged. I mean, I had a case a couple of years ago. I testified, and it's public, but I mean, it's a similar type of situation where we were hired by a husband who was being investigated for killing his wife. He ultimately was charged, but he wasn't charged for like a year later. And during that year, we did an investigation, and we did a lot of the same things that the police did. We interviewed neighbors. We talked to everybody we could about. It was a voluminous investigation that took a year. Ultimately, the guy was charged and he was convicted. But we were clear about what our purpose was in that case. I mean, it was the husband vehemently denied having anything to do with the murder, and he wanted to find out who the person really was, and that's what we were doing. That's what we were doing.
Right, and I think that's one of the interesting things. I had a new to the business investigator working with me on a criminal case a couple of years ago, and he was saying, well, we were talking about a witness that we weren't able to locate and find and talk to, and we really wanted to talk to this person. And he said, well, I could pretend to be X and get to them that way. And I was totally uncomfortable with it. I'm like, we're criminal defense investigators. I think in this work, you have to be kind of overt and open about, I am Hal Humphreys. I'm an investigator working for the law firm of whatever. I'm working on this case. Nobody's in any trouble here. I just need to find out what happened. Yeah. Anytime you start getting into pretexts in cases like this, you can get in trouble, I think, pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Attorneys have an ethical bar not to, their agents aren't allowed to pretext.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Proportionality is the last bit. And before we get to that, we're just past the halfway mark. And for the folks in the webinar today, and for those that are going to watch tomorrow and Saturday and Sunday, PI Education has a gift for you. If you go to pieducation.com and select the ethics course, which is a new course, I think it's approved for 2 hours of continuing education. It takes care of your ethics requirement to maintain your license. If you go there today, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and key in the promo code ethics, all lowercase, ethics, we'll give you a 10% discount on the course. And that's a pretty decent little savings. So again, pieducation.com, promo code ethics. And this is for the ethics course alone. I know in most cases you're required to have a certain amount of ethics every cycle for your license. So this will get that taken care of. And I'm telling you, I've watched the course twice now. Kevin McNish is an ethicist by trade. He's a university lecturer. He happens to be British, so he's got that really cool British accent. It's a good course. I think you would get a kick out of it. So pieducation.com, select the course catalog for your state, find the ethics course, and then discount code ethics will get you a 10% discount. So coming back to our list of things to consider in ethically taking cases, proportionality. Is the intrusiveness of the investigation proportionate to the reason for the investigation? I think this is a really interesting question. Does the weight of the case merit you digging as far as you're going to dig?
Yeah, this is a really tough one. I mean, practically speaking, the person's budget really determines how much you do in the investigation. I mean, I guess I have, and you have to be kind of careful, because even in cases, I mean, I just got finished giving a warning about divorce and custody cases, but I think you also have to appreciate the fact that in those cases, even though people might be very unreasonable, there's no denying that to that person, the issue that's being investigated is incredibly important. You know, so it's not really a question. If you could compare it to a multi-million-dollar fraud case, but when you're talking about somebody's kid in custody, that person might gladly sacrifice, $2 million in order to to see their sons more on the weekend, or whatever the issue is. And so I think it's hard to separate the issue of proportionality from the how much is it worth to you aspect of it.
Right. I totally get that. That makes perfect sense to me. And I think McNish's idea for asking this question of investigators is, maybe, and I've not thought about this in a lot of detail before, but maybe we should think sometimes about, are we doling out $50 worth of punishment for a $5 crime? Maybe we ought not dig. I don't know. It's a difficult thing. I'm the guy, and I think you're the guy, and I know most of the investigators I work with and spend time with. If there's budget, we're going to dig as far as we can because we're curious and we want to know as much as we can about the situation.
Right.
That's an awkward one. We'll come back to that at another day. We'll talk about proportionality. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the one thing I'd say about it, it seems to be more an issue of, surveillance is where there's the most potential for abuse there. I mean, if somebody has an unlimited budget and wants you to do surveillance on somebody indefinitely, in theory, that's possible. And I'm sure that's happened in some circumstances. We've had a custody case where the client spent easily $50,000 on this issue. And it was incredibly important to him. And we did a ton of surveillance on this woman with her kids. And some of the information ended up being helpful. And I think it was helpful to his case. But that's a lot of surveillance that you're doing.
That is a lot of surveillance
that not many people could afford, and this guy could afford it, and so he did it, and we did the work. And so it's hard for me to say that wasn't ethical or that there was an ethical issue there. But I do think that there's the potential. I think where you really, you have to go back to the issue of what the purpose of the investigation is, and if it's something that's a wishy-washy issue, or you're doing protracted surveillance on somebody and nothing's coming up that's helping your case, and there's no chance that it's going to come up. It kind of delves into the other issues that we discussed, where you're you're A, you're wasting the person's money, B, you're working towards some other end that's not resolving the case, and C, there's an issue of why does this person want to spend this much money when it's not helping them? What else is at play there?
Right. Which I think all those points bring us to the last point on this kind of 8-point list, which is discrimination. And we're not talking about discrimination based on race, color, creed, or sex. We're talking about looking at the job in a discriminating fashion. And the example McNish gives here is if investigating adultery, is the investigation being carried on the suspect cheating spouse or also on the suspected lover, work colleagues, and others? I get what he's going at there. I think what is a really good example of this, I had a request from a government agency to look at a dispute between two professionals. And typically they will send me the case file, and it will have the initial complaint and the respondent's response, and then the work that is being argued about. In this case, I got the initial complaint. I got the response from the respondent, the person who's had the complaint filed against them. The initial complaint did not articulate a specific property, did not articulate a specific issue, didn't articulate a specific report. It just, the guy said, I don't like this guy. He was rude to me on the phone. The respondent responded, and in his response, he provided a copy of his work file on the project he had done for this person, even though the person never said what specific issue he had with the work done and what property was being dealt with. I called my client and I said, look, I don't see any reason to dig into this guy's work based on this complaint, because they didn't articulate a problem with it. They didn't articulate what property he had looked at for them. So my discrimination in that situation was, I don't see a reason to take this further down the rabbit hole in this case for a number of reasons. Number one, it's not warranted by the complaint. Number two, every professional who puts work product out there, report analysis, stuff like that, opens himself up to liability. I don't see any reason to dig into their work if there's no real claim of malfeasance or anything like that. So that was my way of looking at it. Do you have any thoughts on something like that? And I'm being kind of vague, but
yeah. Well, and I guess so. The issue is from the investigator's standpoint, discerning who the focus of the investigation is based on based on what you know about the case at the outset, and also, are you talking about your internal? And I know you're not talking about specifically racial or sexual discrimination, but also people's sort of any prejudices you might have going into the investigation. I guess I could see those. I see those as kind of two different things. On the prejudice issue, I mean, that was something that I covered about in the article that you referenced earlier in Pursuit Magazine. That we all have. I think that everybody should have limits to, or have an idea of cases they won't work or places that they won't go before they accept their first case. I call them moral imperatives. That that you sort of own your baggage and own your prejudices, and that came about. I'll try to skirt the political issue here because I don't want to create any undue controversy. But we did some cases last year where for political cases for conservative interests, and there was a point in time when I said I can't do these cases anymore because of my own perspective, and I'm a pretty liberal individual, and I decided that I couldn't do that anymore. And I think that was I guess I own that discrimination, that prejudice, that I just couldn't. I didn't want my firm to be involved in those cases anymore. And I also don't think it would be fair to the client to do those cases because I guess because my views are so well known that I didn't want that to filter down to my investigators who are doing the cases in such a way that I'm signaling to them that it's not important or they don't have to try as hard. And I would just rather not do the cases rather than tarnish my reputation or do something unethical. So I think that's one aspect that's how I see that aspect of discrimination in one facet. And then the other, in terms of the focus of the investigation, it kind of goes back to, I think, what it goes back to the purpose of the investigation. I mean, this happens all the time in defense investigations or criminal defense investigations where you're getting guidance from a client to go interview this person or go interview that person about some issue that might be tangentially related to the case, but that really actually doesn't address the issue of what the facts are going to be at trial. And sometimes it's a pretty overtly just an issue, I don't like a personal issue that the defendant wants to investigate, and they know that they have an investigator who's helping them out in this thing, and so they're why not do a database search on my ex-girlfriend? That stuff happens, and so you have to go, wait, why am I doing this? Who is this person? How do they relate to the case? Why is it that I'm doing this? And you got to be careful anytime you're working for attorneys. Aren't as bad at this, but even attorneys sometimes ask you to do some wacky stuff, and you gotta ask the question of why it is they're asking, and how it relates back to that issue.
And I think that's one of the things that he's getting at in his list of things to consider is that I like to develop with a client. I like to develop a scope of work. Here's the investigation. Here are your objectives. Here are the things I will do. Here are things I won't do. Just kind of a scope of work. What do you expect? What do you need to get? And develop a scope of work. There are some times when this scope creeps and becomes larger, and everybody understands, and you have to deal with that. But there's some things that fall so far out of the scope of work that that's not a thing I need to be doing, such as doing a TLO search on my ex-girlfriend.
that would certainly qualify.
I've had that same request too from a defendant. Hey, can you check out my ex-girlfriend? We're getting down about 15 minutes left to go. I do want to talk about the Pursuit article because I loved it so much. And I'm assuming since these stories are in Pursuit that they're stories that we can talk about freely. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I like the idea of we alone are responsible for vetting our clients, upholding the law, and make sure our investigations are done on ethical purposes. How do you go about vetting your clients, Phillip?
Ask them questions about what it is that their intentions are. This was the whole, I don't even know if the company's still around, but these sort of transactional companies that are doing background checks online. And there was one recently that's purports to be a national investigator clearinghouse of sorts, and people can go and engage these companies and do background checks without any questions asked. And that's not the way it's supposed to be done. We're supposed to ask questions about and know who our clients are and what their issues are. We're not just doing database searches or background checks or surveillance on people because somebody has money without any questions asked. So a lot of it's questions. I wouldn't say we do background checks on our clients necessarily, but I think if something doesn't seem right, we look into it further, and if there's something not right, then we don't take the case.
Yeah, that's good. That makes perfect sense. What are the benefits of working through an attorney in this situation?
It's always a good idea. Besides the fact that you that generally your work product is covered by attorney work product and attorney-client privilege, so the other side won't get it. That's the major one. But also, attorneys sort of form a buffer between you and your clients to. Everything that's worth investigating is contentious to somebody. It's usually the parties involved. Everybody's worked up about it. And so an attorney is a buffer between you and that emotion that helps you focus the investigation on the things that matter versus what the person who's experiencing all the emotion might think matters. And usually they're two different things. And so defendant or plaintiff, whoever asks you to do a bunch of stuff, and the attorney goes, wait a second. Don't do that stuff. Only do this stuff, and it's good because you have another person who you could rely on to help keep you focused. And so it's a really good practice. I recommend working for an attorney whenever you possibly can.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And the benefits of working for an attorney, as opposed to working directly for a private individual, are you've got that buffer. You've got someone you can play as a straw man, and I'm not going to do that work because this attorney won't let me. But it also protects you. If you're working for an attorney and they've got pending litigation, you can go on to your databases and say with 100% honesty, I'm doing the search as part of diligence for a pending legal action, and you have access to more information that way. The other thing I like about working with attorneys is if you're a good investigator and you do good work and you've got a long track history with your attorneys, they will have your back when you find yourself in weird situations. And I'm talking about specifically, when a fellow investigator was threatened with arrest for trying to interview a witness. The attorneys were like, "Are you willing to spend the night in jail?" And she said, "Yeah." So they said, "Let him arrest you and we will fight tooth and nail for you." If you're working with attorneys and you find yourself, up against law enforcement, and I say up against, it's the wrong word. If you find an overzealous law enforcement officer trying to mess with you, your attorneys will have your back. I'm lucky to work with what I think are some of the best attorneys in the country. I love my attorney clients, and they have my back, and I have their back, and that's kind of the way we do this work. But the first thing that you mentioned about privileged information, I think is probably the most key issue. Is when we work for the attorney, that can be considered work product, and it's way more protected than work I do for an individual. I even go so far sometimes as when I've worked on divorce cases, I will have the attorney's client write my check to the attorney and have the attorney write me a firm check. So there's no way anyone can say I was being paid by that lady or that man. I was being paid by that person, and therefore it's not protected. Just some things to think about. So we talked about the buffer. I want to hear more about these moral imperatives real quick before we get to the last topic we're going to talk about today. Talk to me about your moral imperatives, boundaries you will never cross.
Well, I mean, you talked about some licensing as one. I won't violate the law. I won't violate the licensing law. I mean, that's an example of a moral imperative. I mean, if you have that in your mind at the outset as something you won't do, then it's not an issue of whether will I take the case or not. It's just something that you won't do if that opportunity comes up. So that's the most obvious one. I won't. Sometimes people have. I think I read. I think it might have actually come from you, but an example of an investigator who said that if they were to find information about a criminal defendant, that they would find a way to turn it over to the prosecutor. And I thought, geez, my first impression was that's awful. But my second impression was, well, at least it's good that he's verbalized, or she was verbalizing that, because then that should become a moral imperative. They shouldn't do criminal defense cases at all, because they're not ethically equipped to handle it. And I think it's better that you're open about those types of things than to harbor those prejudices and not talk about them, and then have them screw up somebody's life. So I guess that's what I mean about moral. It's different for different people.
Yeah, and I think it falls in the category of the investigator I was talking about, who said that to me. They actually said, if I find information that's horribly damning, that I think the district attorney needs to know, I'll find a way to get it to them. And I'm a criminal defense investigator by trade. That's what I do, and I find that attitude offensive. Which brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think this falls into the same category. There's a story you reference in your article in Pursuit, where there's Emmanuel Welch, I think, is talking about working for a company that is oppressive to women. And she told him no amount of money would have me help bring a woman back into an oppressive situation. Things that abuse your conscience. You've got to know what they are, and you've got to be ready to deal with those.
Yep, absolutely. Good for her for being able to voice that. And, I mean, I think it's really important for new private investigators to know that. I mean, if anybody gets anything out of this talk, the one thing that I'd want people to get out of it is that the stuff that you do has the potential to impact people's lives. And it's more than just a case. It's more than just a transaction between you and your client. You could be doing surveillance for some BS reason, and you could T-bone a car and hurt somebody. So all that stuff, or I guess I gave another example in that article about potentially working for a foreign adversary in a political campaign. And you have to think about what the ramifications are for what your cases are, and really weigh these issues, and don't just take it for granted. Because the work we do is important. We have a lot of responsibility, and there is a lot of potential to hurt people if we don't do it right.
Yeah, if we do really good work for the wrong person or the wrong reason, we can do harm, serious harm.
Or if we do really crappy work for the right reasons too. If you don't know what you're doing, own up to that and say, I don't know. I need to, get a second opinion on that. Don't just,
There are so many times, and I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, but for the past several years, I've done this kind of year in review, and I went back and looked at several of them, and in every one of them, I've said something along the lines of, the older I get, the less I know. The older I get, the more I need to learn. The older I get, the more I need to study. I'm becoming way more comfortable with saying, you know what, that's outside of my wheelhouse. Maybe you should call somebody else,
yeah.
and give them a referral. So we got about 5 minutes left, and I think we have beat the ethics horse with the stick enough to where we can step away from it for a bit. Um, Phillip, you have a new book out, and it's not a private investigations how-to or textbook. It's a novel.
Yeah, it's a different thing for me.
And
Yeah.
there's one scene in particular. My wife Kim, the editor at Pursuit magazine, was really curious about, where there's apparently a head flung from a trebuchet at the White House.
Several heads, yeah, actually, but not literal heads. They're actually the heads of statues. But yeah, it's an homage to the Monkey Wrench Gang, which is a book that was written in the 1970s by a guy named Edward Abbey. He wrote, so the term monkey wrenching refers to blowing up bridges and destroying tractors and stuff for ecological issues, and he was the one who coined that term. So my book is it's an homage to the Monkey Wrench Gang set in post-Trump America, and it's a group of rebels, including an attorney and a private investigator and a legal assistant and a defendant, who band together and form a rebel organization where they essentially monkey wrench fascism in America.
What is the title of the book?
It's called Freedom City.
Freedom City. How did you decide, man, I want to write a novel?
Actually, going back to before I was even started doing private investigations 20 years ago, writing was always something that I wanted to do. And I've told the story in other places, but yeah, as soon as I graduated college, I wanted to be a writer. I did some traveling. I tried to write a novel. I decided I didn't have enough life experience, and I sort of fell ass backward into doing private investigations, in which, it gives me a lot of life experience and a lot of information about the city and about, well, a lot of stuff that our jobs are pretty cool and expose us to a lot of different people and a lot of different stuff that other people don't get to see every day. And so now I have the experience, and I thought, well, it's time for me to go back and to try to put some of that into a novel and to pursue that original dream of wanting to be a writer. And so that's kind of where I am now, where I'm still managing my firm. I took some time off last year to write this book, and kind of getting back into the investigation business. But I'm hoping the novel takes off and it might take me in a different direction, which would be that's my ultimate goal.
That's insane. I love it. I'm thrilled for you. The book is called Freedom City. Is that right?
Yes.
Freedom City by Phillip Becnel. I'm assuming we can get that on Amazon.com.
You can get it on Amazon. Yep.
Okay, and that's a hardback, paperback, Kindle.
It's a paperback. Paperback. It's on Kindle. Yep, you can get it just about anywhere. But yeah, you can get it on Amazon and Kindle or paperback version.
Okay, very good. Phillip, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm totally thrilled that you were able to take the time and do it. I know it was kind of a last minute notice, but I'm tickled that you're here. I've enjoyed visiting with you today and yesterday as well. For all the folks out there in the crowd, when we get done with this webinar, you're in your Google Chrome browser. Go ahead and key in Amazon.com and go pick up a copy of Freedom City by Phillip Becnel. I think you'll enjoy it. In the meantime, we are running a special. We've been talking about ethics all day, which is an oddly fascinating topic, I think. So we've been talking about ethics all day. We are running a special on our ethics course at pieducation.com. If you go to pieducation.com and select your state and the course catalog, find the ethics course. It's got a new course tag on it. And when you select that course, it's a 2-hour course. It counts for continuing education. When you select that course, when you go to the shopping cart, you key in the promo code ETHICS, all lowercase letters, just key in the promo code ETHICS, and you'll get 10% discount. Now, I'm telling you, this discount is from now until Monday the 26th. It stops on the 26th. So you got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and today to take advantage of that. But we hope you do. Phillip Becnel, any parting words for the audience?
Well, no, just thank you, Hal, for having me. It's been great, and yeah, check out my book. And if you read it and you like it, I'd love to hear what you had to say about it.
That sounds fantastic. And in the meantime, Phillip and I are going to work on the LBI, the League of Bearded Investigators, and we'll let you know how that comes along.
Cool.
Phillip, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Take care.